Welcome to EWA's FIN LYT podcast. EWA is a fee-only RIA based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We hope all listeners of this podcast will benefit as we deep dive into complex financial topics that we will make simplified for you. And we hope that this really serves as a catalyst so that you can make the best financial planning decisions for your family and also save time. Welcome, everyone. Joined here by Chris Pavcic. We are going to talk about a sample case analysis for someone in retirement that is recently widowed and in their mid-70s with $3 million. So there's a lot of good planning that needs to be done in advance, and then obviously after for someone in the distribution mode. So, Chris, let's set the stage. So this person had about $1 million in about $1 million in a brokerage account with Merrill Lynch, and they also had some retirement money. So give us just a high level snapshot of the retirement side.
Yeah. So on the retirement side, she worked in the nonprofit sector, so has a 403B and also a 457 plan on the retirement side. Both of these were approximately $900,000, and then the rest was in brokerage accounts. So you mentioned the one.
Yeah, the one was at Merrill at $1 million, then another $1 million at Morgan Stanley. It looks like so $3 million. So basically $1 million, $1 million, $1 million. So $2 million in brokerage, $1 million through the 403B, 457 plan.
And those were both pre-tax too, no Roth funds.
Okay, and those are all pre-tax.
Yep.
I believe through the ORP system in Texas, right? So all pre-tax, similar to, all treated as pre-tax. The 457 was a governmental plan. That's important to note because a governmental 457 can be rolled to an IRA, whereas a traditional 457, you have to take that pretty quickly after retirement. It's all taxable.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk through, so this person needed about, $6,000 a month of spending. So one of the first issues that you brought up to the table, Chris, was around tax bracket management and Medicare management. So what happens when someone becomes a widow? They obviously have a year, but after that year is over, talk about how the brackets shrink.
Yeah, so this is something in our world known as the widow penalty, they call it, because your tax brackets and your Medicare brackets shrink. So they're almost cut in half. So, for example, the 10% tax bracket, I believe, if you're married, is up to $22,000 or so, versus if you're single, it's only $11,000. Same with Medicare brackets. The amount that you're paying is based on income. So, you can show a higher income if you're married versus if you're single, you're going to pay more.
And those brackets essentially get cut in half once you're single versus married filing joint. Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay, so basically, looking at the analysis you did, Chris, here, if we do nothing, I mean, so there's going to be an RMDs of about, so Social Security so there's this TRS pension paying about, $50,000 a year. The Social Security is paying about $40,000 a year. So right off the bat, there's $90,000 of income, and that eats up that 10, the 12, and we're far into even the 22% rate, just with those sources of income that are going to come in no matter what. So then required minimum distributions you analyzed here are just over, about $45,000. So now we're at a total of about 140-ish, we'll call it, between Social Security, pension. So obviously, she needs about $6,000 a month to live off of. She has more than that coming in right off the bat, just between these three sources: RMDs, Social Security, and pension, right off the bat. So talk about I see about $8,000 a month. So there's $2,000 a month extra. So talk about some of the immediate recommendations that we're going to do to give more control and more tax efficiency and more Medicare efficiency down the road.
Yeah, so the first thing that we looked at and analyzed were Roth conversions. It makes sense to move some of the pre-tax money over to Roth. We thought, yes, it does, because right now, as you pointed out, she has more coming through the door than she needs to maintain her lifestyle. And that's great because, money's not a concern, but we're being kind of inefficient as far as showing income that we don't have to through those RMDs, because the RMDs are above what she needs to support her lifestyle. So our thought process with this case is to take the one-time tax hit this year and over the next couple of years to flip some of that pre-tax money to Roth, which in turn will minimize future RMDs and get us to the right balance where we're only recognizing enough taxes where that equates to the right after-tax income for her.
Awesome. I see you have up to $191,950 is where the 24% federal tax bracket runs out. So if we look at her 3 income sources right now, plus she doesn't have dividends and interest, so we'll just say she's at, after standard deduction, about $150 of income that she's in the show. So that would give us about a $40,000 to $41,000 runway per year to do Roth conversions and also get that done at a 24% bracket. But then also if we look at the Medicare brackets, as a single person, if you go, over 193 total, you jump from the 4th to the 5th tier of Medicare. So basically we're going to have a couple years of pain as we get the Roth conversions done. Our Medicare premiums jump, but then after that's done, after the 2-year look back's done, because Medicare looks back 2 years, then that's going to fall off. And our target is to get her into the 2nd or 3rd bracket forever in Medicare once these Roth conversions are done.
Yep.
So now the other thing you mentioned is that she is charitably inclined. So one of the strategies here is, are we going to do a wait and see approach? And initially she just had a will that had everything split between, some family members and then charity. And you pointed out a couple of things for tax efficiency. So walk us through like which accounts are going to be directed where now, and then what can she do while she's living from a charitable perspective and also save a lot more in taxes.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot to be done in this area, just given the charitable goals. So if we go back to her account makeup on the balance sheet, so approximately, $1 million was in retirement, $1 million in the brokerage account, $2 million in each brokerage account. So with what we advised was to leave the qualified accounts to the charities, because they're going to get those. They don't have to pay any tax whenever they get those. If she wanted to go the route like gift to charity at death through her estate plan, but then we also pointed out we could start doing stuff while she's living to be way more tax efficient through a donor advised fund, and that's where we looked at using some of this brokerage assets to donate while she's living.
So why a donor advised fund versus a QCD?
Yeah. So the donor advised fund, so for her, it makes a ton of sense because the one brokerage account that has about $1 million in it was made up of just one concentrated holding that's operating at a big gain. So out of the $1 million, about 500,000 is a gain, which is an awesome, really good problem to have. She doubled her money. But if she sells that while she's living, she'll incur capital gains tax, versus if we move it to the donor advised fund, she gets a deduction that, that's going to decrease what she's showing on her tax return. So we get an immediate
deduction off of AGI.
Mm-hmm. And then second, she avoids the capital gains tax that she would otherwise recognize herself if she were to sell it. So there's no capital gains if we do that.
And this works along with the Roth conversion too, Chris, because if we do a Roth conversion, so the limit on a donor advised fund is 30% of AGI. So if her AGI is 150 right now, the most she could put into a donor advised fund is 45,000, right? 30% of the 150. However, if we do, let's just say hypothetically, we do another 150 of a Roth conversion, now we have 300,000 of, let's just say enough with the standard deduction involved, just talking high level, we have 300,000, but 30% of that is 90,000.
Yep.
So if we do a $150,000 Roth conversion, that enables her to take 90,000 and contribute to the donor advised fund, which then knocks her income down to 209.
Yeah.
So back within, closer to that 24% bracket. So basically there's an artwork here of saying we only want to convert money into Roth at a 24% bracket, but let's get enough into the donor advised fund to inflate that income and then immediately erase, enough in a Roth conversion, inflate the income and then immediately erase a lot of that through the donor advised fund. And as you pointed out, we're not just getting a 24% deduction on that, we're avoiding that or that 15% capital gain rate
Yeah.
on that appreciation if we're gifting an appreciated holding versus just cash. So obviously, if you have a non-qualified appreciated holding, you get the double tax benefit when you use that to fund the donor advised fund.
Mm-hmm. And then the triple, I guess the third benefit for her specifically is the fund. It was an actively managed mutual fund, and it had high turnover too. So as companies were getting swapped in and out, those capital gains trickled through to all, not just her, all the individual investors in this fund. So you don't really have control over that. So there were years where there were big tax hits that could have been avoided.
So if we're trying to do all this super detailed work of here's what Medicare bracket we want to be, here's what tax bracket we want to be, here's our a huge capital gain out of a big mutual fund could literally ruin all of the hard work that we put in all the analysis, because that's not up to you.
Yeah.
So ideally, as we unwind that, we want to direct index that where we can carry forward tax loss harvests to then, erase capital gains getting pushed on you without you knowing or wanting them. We can control how much capital gains you show or don't show by offsetting, the carry forwards against any gains in that year.
For sure. Yeah. So a lot of efficiency. It's cool because all of it's possible, I guess, first and foremost through our charitable goals, because we're able to do like all three of these things at once. We can convert funds to Roth, unwind that holding, the big concentrated holding in the brokerage account, then three, still solve the charitable goal, and give to charity while living. And then also, if you could gift from that donor advised fund at any point this year and future years, or you could just leave it and give the proceeds at death. So it's very flexible.
Yes, ideally at death, she's going to want to have, from a charity perspective, while she's living, obviously using a highly appreciated stock, moving it into the DAF's going to enable a lot of her goals. And then if there's money left, which obviously, given her spending patterns versus her net worth, there's going to be a lot left unless she decides to spend more. Pre-tax money to charity, and then the Roth money would be perfect to go to family members because they would receive that tax-free. And then even the taxable account, there may be a step up in basis available there under current tax law. That obviously could change as well. But with the direct indexing strategy, where we can step basis up along the way without, her paying the tax, again, with the tax loss harvest and offsetting the gains one for one. So let's talk about portfolio. So, she's 77. What should our portfolio allocation be?
Yeah, so if you Google this, you'll get a lot of different answers, kind of like cookie cutter answers. So I just did it while we're sitting here. And the first thing that pops up, if you Google how should my portfolio look if I'm 77, it brings up this 120 minus age rule. So it's looking at like if you're 77.
So 43. That's how much you want in equities, 43%.
Yeah. Which based on her plan, we didn't think makes a lot of sense. So the way that what we recommended ultimately was to be 80-20 overall, just because she doesn't, like we talked about, the income sources that she has is covering her expenses. So we want to protect her nest egg, but it's not like we're relying on the portfolio for income, but we still want to have a safe bucket to pull into. So that 20% that's in bonds, we can reasonably expect isn't going to be as volatile.
And that's $3 million. So 20% of $3 million is $600,000.
Yeah.
And so that would, based upon her current spending patterns, if she's, the Social Security and pension is giving her everything she needs. If she were to spend up to capacity, that's going to give her, like a 20-year runway of what she would need at a minimum, like an extra $30,000 a year minimum. So I think that's even too conservative, but that's gonna allow her to sleep at night very well, even the 80-20. But that's a great point that you bring up. So out of that 20%, though, I think it's really important to bring up the duration of those bonds. So we want to have some bonds that are available without interest rate fluctuation. So if she needs money that year, they're short term, and then the average within the portfolio will be a 5-year duration.
Right.
As well, because the last thing you want to do is sell a bond when the market's down.
For sure.
So, okay, Chris, anything to add on the portfolio?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a lot of because like you said, it's still, you could argue, still conservative. It sounds crazy because 77 saying that 80/20 is too conservative. People might think that sounds a little nuts, but
given her individual goals.
Yeah, so there was a lot of, because that's what I was saying is you're, I think, comfortable in this position, this setup, but she, like to your point about the sleeping at night, like she just felt more comfortable with being more on the, I guess, conservative side of the.
So we ended up 80/20.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's like
realistically, she could have been 90/10.
Yeah.
Even as a 77-year-old.
Right.
But given that she's not, the main goal of that is wealth preservation for the next generation or charity.
Yeah.
So, okay, perfect. Well, then let's talk about where do we hold the bonds? Where do we hold the stocks? What type of stocks do we hold in which account? Give us an overview of the asset location strategy we have in place for her.
Yeah. So where we're holding certain investments, you want to be mindful because each of these accounts has different tax treatment. So if we look at her brokerage accounts, those accounts receive capital gains tax treatment. So if we sell something at a gain, we have to pay 15%. But if we hold a stock that pays a dividend or a bond that pays interest, that's going to be taxable as income. So
even if you don't use it.
Yeah. So when we were just talking about the 80/20, that 20% that's in bonds, we wouldn't want to hold those bonds in the brokerage account because bonds pay interest, and that's going to add to our tax bill.
What about municipal bonds though? Because municipal bonds are tax exempt. Those still, and this is a trick of the trade. They're tax free federally. They could be state if you're buying a municipal bond in the state you live, depending on the rules. But they still show up on something not AGI, but
yeah, it's called MAGI or modified adjusted gross income.
So address that real quick. Why? Because we're playing these Medicare brackets. So why is that MAGI so important for her? Because we could hold municipal bonds. The listeners could say, why don't you hold municipal bonds in the taxable account? What's that going to do if we do that?
You just mentioned it. The Medicare, specifically the Part B and Part D premiums are based on income. So we're trying to do everything that we can to not basically on her tax return appear that she doesn't have a couple $1 million saved.
So if we do $600,000 in the taxable brokerage account and put it in municipal bonds, are tax free. But let's say they're getting a 5% interest rate, 5% of 600, that's $30,000 a year. That's tax free, but that $30,000 still shows up as part of her modified adjusted gross income, which is what Medicare takes into consideration. And then our Medicare premiums are going to continue to be, very, very high.
Right.
So that's why we want to hold them inside of the IRA, obviously.
Yep. So any bonds, those are best suited for the IRAs because no matter what, it's just whenever you take the distribution, that whole distribution is taxable as income. It doesn't matter what happens between now and when you take the money out, if dividends are paid out or if interest is paid out, it doesn't matter in an IRA. So tax inefficient investments should be held there, not the brokerage account. So.
No question. Okay, and then what type of equities? So the Roth, the IRAs, it looks like it's with $1 million. That's going to be a 40-60 account, 40% equities, 60% bonds, because that 60% is going to be the bond allocation. So what does the Roth look like, and then what does the taxable account look like ideally?
Yeah, the Roth IRA. So that's our most tax efficient long-term planning account. So it's all tax-free growth, and the fund distributions are also tax-free. So that's where we want our highest appreciating investments. We want them in that Roth IRA. So we wouldn't hold bonds there because we would naturally be limiting that growth. So the Roth, all equities, the bonds are going to be held in the traditional, the pre-tax IRAs. And then the brokerage account, we recommended to implement direct indexing, which we've talked about a lot on the podcast, but that's going to hold individual equities that we're tax loss harvesting over time.
Absolutely. So. And that's super important to keep that AGI down, keep that MAGI down. We can take up to $3,000 even against income, but then really eliminate that capital gain line item on the balance sheet, that someone would have the mutual fund spitting out every year, around the November, December timeframe. So, okay, perfect. And then, so why ultimately from a distribution perspective, she was in some life cycle funds with the 403B and 457 plan.
Yep.
So the first, why was it important we move those versus just keep those in those funds, not pay an advisory fee to us? What is the major downside there as she distributes that money?
Yeah. So as far as distributions, the concern is with the life cycle funds, she's in RMD years, she has to take required minimum distributions. So for this year, those RMDs were about $40,000. So whenever we had to process those first before we rolled the funds to our IRA. And if you're just in a life cycle fund, it's going to sell pro rata across large cap, mid cap, small cap, international. And so each of those asset classes are going to be, they're independent, and some are going to be up, some are going to be down. But if you're in a life cycle fund, you just sell across the board, versus if you hold a fund that covers large cap, a fund that covers mid cap, we can pick and choose where we're selling from and be, control over where we locking in a gain or a loss from a return standpoint.
Super important. We actually did a podcast on that'll be published soon that breaks down if you're doing a pro rata distribution versus have a actual strategy between equity and bonds, which equity and bond to pull from. It could be a couple hundred, if just talking about $1 million distributing over 20 years at a 5% distribution rate, it can be a couple $100,000. Well, it could be like over $1 million difference.
Yeah.
With how you do that and how we address the sequence of return risk. So
yeah. And then secondly, I'd say, I know your question was about the portfolio, more like distribution wise with the life cycle fund, but that is also where all of her pre-tax money was. So it would be to coordinate the Roth conversion planning. Same thing, like we could, if it's in the IRA, we can choose when to convert it. We can actually pick which funds we're converting. So it goes even a step deeper than just the RMDs, the Roth conversions. That was crucial too, get those consolidated.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks for giving us a high level overview. A lot of considerations. You think I'm retired, I'm set, I've got $3 million, I can put my plan on autopilot. We were looking at the tax savings, the difference in plans. I mean, there's over $1 million in efficiency at play here if we do the right steps, and stay disciplined year by year over the next 20, 30 years for this client. So thanks for breaking it down, and thanks for joining everybody. Look forward to catching you next week. Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. Hopefully you found this helpful. Really hope this is as beneficial and impactful to as many people across the nation as possible. So hit the follow button. Make sure to rate the podcast, and please share with any friends or family members that would also find this beneficial. Thank you very much.